Summary of Mastering Business Negotiation. A Working Guide to Making Deals and Resolving Conflict. By Roy J. Lewicki and Alexander Hiam. The Game of Negotiation. Negotiation happens all the time. People negotiate with themselves, their loved ones and their co-workers. A few governing principles guide each exchange. Mastering these principles will let you pursue your goals more consciously throughout the negotiation process, and will help you pay better attention to your relationships with those involved. Start by recognizing that you usually care about the outcome of your negotiations. If you genuinely don't care, don't negotiate. The investment in a negotiation is both intellectual and emotional. Work out your approach with the other people involved, not in isolation. Your final deals must take your relationships with them into account. Thus, you can't practice a single approach to negotiation. You must adapt your technique depending on who you're negotiating with and how important that relationship is. Thinking of negotiation as a game sometimes helps. Like a game, it has understandable rules. Events aren't random, but occur according to certain patterns that vary depending upon who is playing. Since inexperienced negotiators don't realize this, they enter negotiations without clear goals, cling to fixed objectives without considering the specifics of the particular game, or shift tactics in ways that mislead the other players and generate resentment. To win your negotiations, do the opposite. Be clear about your goals, and move decisively toward them. Act in ways that preserve your important ongoing relationships. As a result of these, at times, conflicting desires, you must be flexible. Examine what you want and how badly, in the context of your relationship. If you want your goal intensely and don't have an ongoing relationship with the other party, for instance, in a one-time sale, use a competitive approach. If preserving the relationship is key, say you're negotiating with relatives, collaborative techniques are better. Always be as clear as possible. What are you seeking? How would you define a successful negotiation? If you're in job negotiations, is your goal a high salary or a chance to advance? In negotiations, examine the other party's tactics and adjust accordingly. How will your styles interact? The better you read the other parties, the more you'll be able to interpret their style. Practice decoding your counterpart's nonverbal clues, so that if they shift positions across the table, you can read the meaning of that change. Preparing to negotiate. Divide negotiations into stages and focus on what you will do at each stage: preparation, opening, bargaining, closing, and implementation. During the preparation stage, gather data to define your goals and tactics. Research the other parties, their goals, and their perspectives on you and the situation. Use open-ended questions and good listening skills. As you gather data, use it to define key points. What would make you walk away? What alternatives do you have? How will you present your goals? During the opening stage, introduce your argument, listen to the other party. Share information and interact, gathering as much new data as you can. Many people think of the bargaining stage as the actual negotiation. Bids are exchanged until, ideally, you reach an agreement. In the closing stage, the parties review their bargain, clarify it and formalize it. This may mean that money changes hands, but it should also entail some form of ritual closure, such as shaking hands. The final stage of a negotiation is implementation, when the agreement is put into action. This could reveal flaws in the agreement, so you may need to revisit it. The time spent on each stage will vary depending on who you're negotiating with, how well you've prepared, and the negotiators' cultures. For example, Americans spend little time building relationships during negotiations, even when that would help, while the Japanese spend more time. As you prepare, ask yourself, what do I want out of this negotiation, and why is it important to me? The first question will identify your goals, the second will identify your deeper interests, and may broaden your negotiating options. Ask the same questions about the other party. This requires research, and requires you to develop a kind of empathic imagination, putting yourself in their shoes. Aid this process by creating situations where you get to know your counterparts. Take a walk with them. Plan what you would do in their position. Walk through the basics, goals, relationships, and examine subtler, more contextual details, like what alternatives they have, whether they have the power to make the deal you want, what other parties have interests that affect the negotiation, and what their approach is most likely to be. Competitive negotiations. When you think of negotiation, you probably think of competition, haggling and bargaining to get what you want. Many people prefer a more collaborative approach, but if the other party is being competitive or if the situation calls for it, you must be able to negotiate competitively. The first step is realizing when you want to compete, such as when the relationship doesn't match an issue, like price. Defining your range is straightforward. If you add other issues, as often happens, it gets more complex. In a competitive negotiation, people often announce explicit opening positions, and then explain why that opening offer is fair, reasonable, or justifiable. Both sides make concessions. Shrinking concessions signal that the negotiators are reaching their walk-away points, or want you to think so. Be sure you have alternatives. You want to know that you can walk away from a bad offer. Competition is useful because it can be quick, and it is necessary when the parties see their interests as incompatible. Competing is less effective when the ongoing relationship matters or when the negotiators are inexperienced and miss other options. Competitors also tend to underestimate the strength, wisdom, planning, and effectiveness of the other party. In competitive negotiation, expect your opening offer to set the tone. Be firm, but not too extreme. You could scare people away. If you go first when stating opening positions, you're giving away information. Go first if you don't care about that, know the other party well, or want to show that you're in charge. If you let the other party go first, you can adjust your position. As you negotiate, plan your concessions and allow the other party to save face. Consider the emotions of the give-and-take process. Try to get the other side to make the larger concessions and to make them first. Limit your concessions, pacing them out over time. If you are negotiating multiple issues, don't assume they have the same priorities for all parties. Find out what's most important. Keep your target and walkaway points in mind and hold to them. In competitive negotiations, don't be surprised if your opponent uses deceptive tactics, from good cop bad cop, to throwing out unrealistic or even false issues to mislead you. Allocate your time. Use schedules to your own ends. Take advantage of delays and such factors as jet lag. Negotiating quickly is okay, if it produces a good deal, but take your time closing. When you reach a deal, phrase it carefully and specifically. Plan for the deal's implementation and think through what it will ultimately mean. Collaborative negotiations. When you negotiate collaboratively, you work with the other party to resolve the conflict. Try to advance your interests by helping the other party. This gives value to your shared relationship. Seek common ground, especially where you have different interests that allow trade-offs. Build a win-win agreement by weighing the parties' varied perspectives or their diverse time frames. Collaboration is especially desirable when the potential conflict is over a small reward, or when the parties are in the same organization. Collaboration depends on trust, openness, and cooperation. To cooperate successfully, both sides must share information. Communicate until you understand each other's needs and objectives, and agree to work together to build deals that serve both parties. Start by identifying the problem, which is harder than it sounds. You'll need to use objective language and discuss the conflict in terms of a common goal. Build a shared understanding of each party's underlying needs and interests. Create alternative solutions. Pair items to trade, expand the pie to be divided, and look for solutions that satisfy everyone. Reshape negative suggestions into positive ones, evaluate proposals, and select a solution. Pay attention to emotions and relationships, address everyone's needs, and make sure things are fair. Compromise. Compromise appeals to people because it seems even-handed, both sides give way and meet in the middle. That's true, but you can improve when and how you compromise. Compromise when you can't really collaborate, but you value the relationship, when your position is relatively weak, and a compromise is the best you can do when you're short of time or under pressure, or when both sides need to gain something. Compromise doesn't cost much time or energy, but remain clear about what you want. Know what you can't compromise on, what matters. Be ready to say no and walk away from a weak deal. Accommodating and avoiding. Negotiate when you have something to gain by engaging in the conflict. Sometimes there's no benefit. In such situations, accommodate or avoid. Accommodate when the relationship matters more than the outcome. Or, accommodate for now, if your position is weak, buying time until it improves. You can build trust, and make the other person feel good. However, you can also pursue a hidden agenda while accommodating. The weakness of accommodation is that it can seem odd to the other parties, as if they won too easily. Make accommodations infrequently since it can establish a pattern in which you always give in. Actively avoid negotiating when the cost is too high, which happens when the other party is actively upset or irrational, or when resolving a problem would cost more than it's worth. Think of avoiding as a way of picking your battles. Framing negotiations. Many people overlook the importance of framing the conflict properly. Frames color how you perceive the other party's actions and limit your options. Your frame determines how you characterize the other parties, especially the motives and meanings behind their actions, and their interests, how you see yourself, your identity frame, and how you would define a successful outcome. You may experience a clash of frames, perhaps if one party views the situation in terms of rights and the other views it in terms of power, or when one party focuses on the process and the other focuses on the outcomes. Framing something negatively is particularly easy if you react emotionally, so step back, be as calm as possible, and see if there is a better way to view the situation. Other tactics, like trying to get you drunk or making weird requests. Be aware and focus on your goals. To use power ethically, make a point of offering fair proposals, which will increase your power. Try explaining your proposals well and logically, or reframing the entire conflict. If you can, you may simply threaten an action, such as firing an employee, but do so only if you're willing to act on the threat if you must.